Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I am intentionally encouraged when I see people doing business the right way. And for the last 15 years, Damon Burton and his team at SEO National have done just that. Now you might say, Brian, what can they do for me in my business? I'm going to tell you what they can do for you. They can help you understand search engine optimization. There are a lot of players out there in the marketplace, but you want a team of people that are going to be dedicated to working with you and helping you to understand search engine optimization and how you can show up higher on search engines so that you can bring more revenue into your business. Damon and his team are full of integrity, honesty, decency, and trust. And if that's important to you and that encourages you, I would encourage you to give them a call today at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get a free quote and tell them you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Get ready for a dynamite conversation coming up right now on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Hey, and welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. Part 2 of my conversation with a good friend, West Virginia House of Delegates member, served in the United States Marine Corps, a small business owner, you name it. This guy's wearing a lot of hats right now, but he's one of the finest people I know, and that is my friend Jim Butler, who joins me this morning on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Jim, we talked about in part 1 of our conversation about your service. I want to talk now about your story around your service. And I intentionally saved this part of the conversation so we'd have a lot of room to explore that. I want you to take me back as far as you want to take us and tell your story. We grew up in the same part of the country. I grew up in Southern Ohio, though. I grew up, spent a little time near where you are. For those geographically that and I want to kind of paint the picture here as Jim tells his story. Jim is in Mason County, West Virginia. Now, geographically, that sits on the Ohio River between Huntington, West Virginia, where Marshall University is, where I went to school, and a little town called Parkersburg, West Virginia. And geographically, they sit right in the middle. So I spent some time, I grew up in a little town across the river from Parkersburg in Belpre. I spent some time up there. But most of my time was spent in Southern Ohio. And geographically, our region sits near the state of Kentucky. So where Jim lives, in about an hour and 15 minutes, he can be in Kentucky, or he can cross the bridge and be in Ohio, which is right across the river from where he lives. But Jim, did you grow up? Let me start here. Did you grow up in Mason County, West Virginia? Kind of take me through your story and your background a little bit.
Okay, well, actually, I grew up in Chillicothe, Ohio, which is about an hour directly north of me. But the way my connection to West Virginia here, and actually I'm sitting on the porch of a farm where my grandparents had a small dairy farm. My mom is from here, right here where like I said, the property I'm sitting on right now. My dad worked at a truck stop here in Henderson, West Virginia, so right here close to where I'm broadcasting from or joining you from. And Dad worked at a truck stop here and met my mom, who was a waitress at the truck stop. And but Dad was from Chillicothe, Ohio. I grew up there. Of course, when they got married, Mom moved to Chillicothe, where my dad was from. And so that's where I grew up. But we came just about every Sunday here to West Virginia, Point Pleasant area of West Virginia. Technically, I'm in Gallipolis Ferry. But we came here every weekend pretty much to visit Grandma and Grandpa.
I won't hold that against
you. She made
you
fried chicken.
I won't hold that against you if you're in Gallipolis Ferry. I mean, but here's, that's interesting because Jim, I lived in Gallia County for a couple of years when I was working up there. And of course we lived I've always said Gallipolis because people over there, if you don't say it right, you have to act like you live there. And so people taught me early when I moved up there, it's Gallipolis. But it's interesting, you guys that live in Gallipolis Ferry, that you say the S instead of, it's lease instead of less. So forgive me for interrupting you there. I had to learn the hard way. The Ohioans like to pronounce it one way, and the West Virginians pronounce it another way. So,
well, that's interesting. I've never even caught that before. But I'm working in Hurricane, West Virginia, which is spelled hurricane, but you say
that's
hurricane.
right.
So.
Hey, folks, another geographical lesson is we have tornado, West Virginia, and we have hurricane, but we don't pronounce it hurricane. We pronounce it hurricane. So
yep, you better get it right.
That's exactly right. But your mom and dad meet. Your mom's working at a truck stop, and your dad, obviously they meet, and so your grandparents. I think that is so interesting about your grandparents running and owning a dairy farm. Do you feel like that you kind of learned some principles of small business watching your grandparents own and operate a dairy farm? Because, that is truly, one, you are totally dependent on what your cows produce. You're totally dependent on nature and biology for your product, your yield, your output. You're totally dependent on the land producing enough grass and hay to be able to feed those dairy cows successfully to get them to lactate to produce that milk. What do you think you learned from your grandparents? You said you guys would come over every Sunday and have dinner and things like that. What did you feel like you learned from your grandparents now that you own and operate your own small business?
Well, actually, most of my business experience was learning from my grandmother on my dad's side, who lived in Chillicothe. My grandparents here in West Virginia, by the time I was old enough to understand anything about business, they had already kind of let the farm go, so to speak. And my grandfather worked at the Marietta plant here in Point Pleasant, which was they manufactured ships. But to kind of answer your question, my grandmother owned a little store in a little area of Chillicothe called Frenchtown, and I would wait on customers. They'd come in and buy a pop and a bag of chips or whatever, and they would I'd tell them how much it was and collect the money and work the register and things like that. And my grandmother taught me that you buy a candy bar for 10 cents and you sell it for, well, actually back then you bought it for probably 2 or 3 cents and sold it for 6 cents, when I was young. So really I learned most of the business from my grandmother, and my dad was also a kind of a handyman construction type of thing. So my dad didn't have a great formal education, but can do anything. So I've learned my work ethic and kind of business from my dad and my grandmother. My grandparents here in West Virginia, though, they were great down home people and just as kind as could be. But as I say, the dairy farm was kind of had fizzled out by the time that I got to really realize anything about business here.
You mentioned the work ethic and things like that. And I love, Jim, I love the balance, because a lot of times we don't balance ourselves.
I'm not hearing you now for some reason.
Yep. Let me go here for just a second. We don't balance ourselves well. We don't balance ourselves well. And it's because, a lot of times one side or the other keeps us from doing that. And Jim, the thing I love about that part of your story is that you and I have real similar backgrounds. I had a legally blind uncle that ran a snack bar, and that's where I learned to make change. I learned how to add in my head. I learned how to serve customers. I was 10, 11, 12 years old. My aunt and uncle ran a snack bar like that. And you talk about learning. It's funny. I love how you said that. Like, I picked up this from this side of my grandparents. I picked up this from the other side of my grandparents. I picked up my work ethic from my dad. I want to talk about how you decided to serve your country, if I could ask that part of it. I don't mean to leave anything out or fast forward. It just feels like that you grew up in a house that just learned how to work and how to love and how to serve people. And it just feels like you telling the early parts of your story, I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see where all that's come together. How did you decide to serve your country and join the United States Marine Corps?
Oh, well, good question. Well, I have an uncle who served in the Marine Corps, and he was a kind of a short guy, just really boisterous, a big personality, and kind of if I may say, a cocky kind of an individual. And I really admired him. He'd come back and tell all of his war stories. So I always thought I'd like to join the Marine Corps. But a part about sort of my upbringing that I think surprises people sometimes is that actually, while I learned my work ethic from my dad, and he was incredibly intelligent, or still is, he's still with us, but my mom and dad were both alcoholics. So we grew up in a broken family. My sister and I did. I have one sister. And dad and mom both spent a significant amount of time in jail, actually. And so I think that has really affected the way that I look at issues like poverty and addiction and those types of things, back to my legislative service. And then when I joined the Marine Corps, as I say, I really admired my uncle, and I've always had a heart for service and just grew up being patriotic. And I think that it was much easier to be patriotic, in our generation than it is, now in the generation now, it seems like, anyway.
Jim, forgive me for jumping in there, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I've got to just pull out a little bit more there. There are a lot of kids that grow up in alcoholic, broken homes like you did that don't turn out the way you did, that don't turn out the way, it really... It starts them on a trajectory and on a course of which they don't ever recover from. What do you attribute the fact of how you stayed right through all that? You mentioned your mom and dad went to jail and things like that. How did you avoid a lot of those same pitfalls as a teenager and a young man yourself?
Well, first of all, I wanted better for myself and, for my future family. But, and I guess part of it was, as I say, because my dad was just so clearly brilliant and could do anything and my mom also, she was the nicest person you'd ever meet. And, I just thought what a shame it was, or, at that age, I was thinking, we could be doing so much better if mom and dad just didn't have this problem, if they stayed focused on doing the things, working and taking care of the family, rather than something that I still don't understand to this day, that there's something about people who are addicts, and that whether you get addicted to gambling or alcohol or drugs or whatever, it's once something, whatever it is that triggers them, then that becomes the most important thing in their life, getting that high, or getting in there and putting the money in that slot machine, or whatever the addiction is. That becomes the most important thing, and everything else falls to the wayside. So as a young person, I just thought, what a shame it was that we were having all these struggles when it wasn't necessary. So my sister has done well too, just to avoid that pitfall. And we both grew up hearing that if your parents are alcoholics, that you're 80 or 90% going to be an alcoholic, that we just didn't fall into it because we wanted better.
Man, that is so good. And again, forgive me for jumping in there. I'm fascinated to know that, because it's like, for me, I've struggled with my weight most of my adult life. I've been thin and I've been big, and I'm kind of in the middle right now. But you have those struggles to where it's either discipline, or it's a combination of factors and things like that. You decide to join the Marine Corps because you had an uncle that carried that persona. Take me through your time. You joined the Marines, and you're like, okay, I'm there. What do you remember most about joining the Marine Corps, and looking back, what do you take away from that time that you served in the Marine Corps?
Oh, wow. Well, One thing I think is typical of someone who joins the Marine Corps is I remember my very first day at boot camp, standing on the yellow footprints and just being inundated and harassed by drill instructors and thinking, my goodness, how did I get here and how can I get out of this? If I could have come home and not disappointed all my family and friends, I would have come home that very day. But, at that point, you've already made the commitment. You signed on the dotted line. So I just made the decision that I was going to stick with it and do the best I could while I was in. I got good grades in high school, so I, took what they call it an ASVAB test, your aptitude test. I did well on that, and I got guaranteed that I could be a mechanic on aircraft, which I'm always been mechanically inclined. So I thought I liked the idea of working on, and Top Gun's a big movie again now, Maverick or whatever. But I wanted to work on fixed wing aircraft and that type of thing. But turned out I got to work on helicopters, which I was disappointed about for a while until I learned that I could actually got to fly in them. I was a crew chief, so basically you're a fly along mechanic on aircraft, and had a great 4 years of service. Got to, or I was forced to go on 2 Westpac floats, Western Pacific, where we went to Singapore, Thailand, Korea, Japan, so all over Asia, and got to see a lot of the rest of the world, and just did the best I could for the 4-year enlistment that I had. And I just never have liked the idea of being bossed around. So that's why I didn't stay in more than 4 years. Just made the best of my service while I was there, got promoted quickly, and it was a great experience. You learn discipline and sort of. I like the military life, and I kind of have tried to carry on that military bearing.
Well, and Jim, you're talking about working on helicopters.
I've continued throughout my life, and I think that is to become a Marine.
Well, you talked about working on helicopters and things like that, and you mentioned Top Gun as we record this. That movie is hot and things like that. So I got to ask you, which one of the Top Gun guys are you? Are you Maverick? Are you Goose? Are you who do you think most resembles? You mentioned the movie, so I got to ask you which character you feel like you most resemble there. Not physically, but in your military life.
I lost you a good bit there, but I think what you were saying was, who do I most identify with on the Top Gun, Maverick or Goose or whoever?
Yeah. I don't mean physically. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear me, but of course I'm Maverick. Who doesn't want to be Maverick, right?
Who doesn't want to be Maverick? That's exactly right. Well, we were talking in the first episode about your journey in politics, and I think you kind of have to have that Maverick bravado. You have to kind of have that Maverick personality to be able to go and do some of the things that you've done in life. And you talk about not wanting to be, bossed and things, and that's perfectly understandable. That senses to me an entrepreneurial spirit.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. Prices are going up by the day. We've got to find ways to increase our household revenue. Now, a couple ways you could do that is, one, you could go and ask your boss for a raise. But if that doesn't work, I've got another way for you. It's my friend Joe Hart's program called Products for Profit. Joe's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast and told his story about how learning retail arbitrage changed his life, and he's been helping thousands of people change theirs. Now, retail arbitrage is simply this. It's taking a product and buying it and then reselling it online for a higher price, and you keep the profits. And guess what? Amazon and Walmart use third-party resellers every day to fulfill their customer orders. I want you to go to productsforprofit.com or productsforprofit.com memb.carrd.co. Get connected to Joe's team, tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast, and start making money today with products for profit. And now let's get back to more great conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Jim, you mentioned you were like, hey, I wanted to go into the Marine Corps, but I didn't like being bossed around. Do you ever think of what your life might be like had you just gone from high school straight to working and not had those 4 years in the Marine Corps?
Actually, I hadn't really thought of it that way, to be honest with you. I've thought about what it would be like if I had just decided to, which I oftentimes regret that I did get out. But honestly, I don't know that it would be a whole lot different. I don't know.
Well, and it's funny you mention that, because you have some guys that will make the military their career. And again, we thank all those that have served for their service, whether you serve for 4 years or 20 years or 30 years, whatever the fact that you've served, the fact that you willingly chose to put on that uniform and go and defend our country in any shape or form, it is worthy of merit. And this is just, folks, you can think what you want to. I think we should honor our military better. I think we should take better care of our military. I've not had to pick up a rifle and go overseas and try to fight for something like that. Like Jim, I took the ASVAB test. I had military recruiters calling me, but I already had a scholarship to Marshall, so I wasn't going to the military. I took it to get out of a class. I took the ASVAB test to get out of a class in high school. But
right.
Again, Jim, what was the biggest lesson that you learned from your time in the Marine Corps that you still use to this day?
Well, I think I've taught this to my kids, and I've actually used it to help raise my kids, is that you always aspire and you prepare for the job that you want, and you always train someone to take your place. And I think that's what our parents and grandparents have been doing for centuries throughout time. But, going back to some of the issues we have, I think that's gotten lost a little bit in some ways, but that's what we all should be doing as parents and as adults, even if we don't have children or children we're interacting with who are not, biologically ours. We need to teach them how to do the right things to succeed, so that they can continue and continue to make the United States a great country and West Virginia a great state, and so forth.
Jim, you and I are pretty close to the same age. And did you ever think at 23 or 24 or 25-year-old Jim, did you ever think that your life would be where it is today? I mean, you're now Jim Butler, you're Delegate Jim Butler, and again, you mentioned in the first episode, you still have a primary over to win, but your track record is very good. You went out of the legislature for a while. Someone took your place. You ran against that person, won the primary. And so it looks very promising that you're going to be back in Charleston, because you're going to be reserving your community in the House of Delegates. If you and I would go back and we would find 25-year-old Jim Butler, we'd say, hey, let me pop this thing out. Let me show you how mid-40s Jim Butler, here's what your life's going to look like. Do you think you would have had any idea that public service would have been a part of that?
Probably not really. Just the moving back here to West Virginia, where being a small state, where I had the opportunity to meet some people who are, well, actually, I guess I've got to credit Barack Obama with a lot of my political career. When he got elected and got in office, I started saying, I got to the point where I said, somebody's got to do something. We have to get control of, or we have to get where people have some say of what's going on in our country, because as you remember, Barack Obama said he's going to remake America. And I thought, no, we don't want to remake America. I love this country and what it's founded upon. So my wife and I started a local Tea Party group. Actually, it's kind of how I got involved in really organized politics. So I don't know if it would have been that easy to do it in Ohio or some other bigger state, but here in West Virginia, being a smaller state, I met my local delegates at the time and eventually met our Congress people and things. And I thought, and this is something that I think all citizens need to realize, is the people serving us in office, they're not more than people either. I mean, they're no doubt they're smart and that type of thing, but they don't know everything, and they don't know what's in our hearts. So it's up to us as citizens to let them know.
A few of the people that I know that serve in our state, I knew them well before they ever ran their first political race. And it's funny you mention that, because they were business people, they were parents, they were a lot like you and I. And people think, well, we just look at the extreme circumstances. We look at, and folks, this is not party specific or anything like that. I'm just going to throw out some names. The Roosevelts. I was watching something last night on Teddy Roosevelt. I was watching a History Channel documentary about the life of Teddy Roosevelt. The Bushes, the families that were politically based and generationally politically based. And I'm probably missing some in there, but the Kennedys come to mind, generationally politically based, that the expectation was that you're going to follow in the family footsteps, so to speak, and go into that business and things like that. Most of the people that I know that served in our state, it was never generationally based. It was, I'm the first person in my family that's doing this, and I've got my reasons for running and things like that. You mentioned your wife and you starting the local Tea Party there in Mason County, and we've had one of the co-founders, Michael Johns, has been on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Michael Johns was one of the founders of the Tea Party. But when you got that taste, Jim, that whatever it is, that, hey, I've got to do more. I've got to where did it go from starting the local Tea Party to, okay, I've got to get more involved and take this to the next level?
Well, for me, a local issue came up, which is Route 35 was one of the main routes, highways coming through my area, and I had heard that they were going to put tolls on Route 35 as they made it in from a 2-lane to a 4-lane. It was a very dangerous 2-lane road, but I heard they were going to put tolls on it, and being a small government type of person, I didn't like the idea of having to pay tolls to drive on that road. So I went to county commission meetings and asked the county commissioners if they were going to vote for this, and they said, well, we didn't know we had any say-so. And so I started learning the process, and it turns out that the county commissioners did have a vote on whether the tolls could go on that road. So to make a really long story short, I came out strong against the tolls and convinced the county commissioners to vote against it, or help them to come to that decision, I hope, and talk to Senator Mike Hall then, who was our state senator. And so through that toll road issue, I became known throughout our community, and I also learned how the process worked.
And that's interesting, because you learn how the process works, and now you're saying to yourself, okay, now I can do something about this. And a lot of us don't take that next step. For you, was that a hard step to take to enter politics and say, okay, I know it's going to affect my time, I know it's going to affect my family? Those would be the things that I would be going through my mind. What were some of the things that entered your mind when you were deciding to take that next step and move to being more a part of the political process?
I lost you again.
No,
I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I think you were asking about was that next logical, so to speak, and it kind of was. It kind of made sense to do that, and there were so many other issues that I was interested in and was learning about that it made total sense to go and run for the House.
Well, and again, you've done that very successfully in our state, and you've really made an impact there. Jim, in the last couple minutes that we've got here today, and again, I so appreciate your time and love hearing your story. Take me through the biggest obstacle that you faced in life, whether it's politically, personally. What's probably the biggest challenge that you've overcome, and what's the biggest lesson you've learned from it?
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know, dreams are powerful pieces of intentional encouragement. We all have them. If you're a business owner, you've probably always dreamed of taking your sales to levels you've never seen before. I've got a guy that can help you with that. His name is Brad Norwood. My good buddy Brad has been on the Intentional Encourager podcast as a guest before, and he is a dream specialist. His company, Dream It Pro, offers incentive packages to travel to places such as the Masters, Kentucky Derby, the Super Bowl, even exotic places that you've always wanted to take your team, but you just didn't know how to do it. Brad's your guy. And oh, by the way, Brad's a certified bucket list coach, so he can help your team members achieve their personal dreams as well. I want you to go to www.dreamitpro.com and find out more, or call him directly at 479-466-6907. And by the way, tell him you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Jim, take me through the biggest obstacle, whether it's politically or in the Marine Corps or whatever. What's the biggest obstacle that you faced in your life, and what was the biggest lesson that you learned from it?
Oh, wow. The biggest obstacle. I guess I would, to honestly answer that, it would have to be my personality to some extent, my pride, the belief that I could do everything by myself. And being that, as I mentioned, as a child, I took care of myself a lot, took care of my younger sister when my parents were not home, joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old and paid my own bills from that time on, started my own business, did pretty much everything by myself, and thought I could just power through things. And not until I got involved in politics did I realize this is something much bigger than myself. And I was not raised up in the church. And actually, politics brought me to the Lord. And it made me humble myself and ask for help. And that's still my biggest obstacle, I think, is asking and accepting help, asking for and accepting help from people. But no matter what's happened, it's brought me, like I said, it's brought me to the Lord, and it's allowed me to, it saved my soul, to just put it in the most basic sense.
Wow. Well, it's amazing what God will use to draw a person to him. And in your case, it was always the plan of the Lord to have you go into politics to bring you to him. And so that's wonderful. That is so cool. Share with me and the audience real quick your biggest piece of intentional encouragement. What is something in life either you've heard somebody say that's always encouraged you, or something that you have found for yourself that has brought you the most intentional encouragement?
Oh, well, it really has been getting involved in the church and seeing my own children, especially, develop a relationship with God and become involved in the church. And they've both done very well, and also seeing other young people in the church do well. And beyond that, also even other young people in our community that I've had the opportunity to meet, whether it be through my political service or just through my excavating business. There's a couple of young guys, 8-year-old twins, who've I've taken a like to, and they've taken a like to me. They were in a neighborhood where I was doing a small excavating job, and they ended up helping me with my campaign. And it's just encouraging to see some young people who have good families, who have this work ethic and have some self-respect and pride in their country and in their state and so forth. So while everything seems so gloomy around us, I do think there are bright spots, and I try to focus on those bright spots.
Well, I tell you what, you certainly have done that, and our state is lucky. I say the state of West Virginia, our state where I live, where you live, we're lucky to have you. And Jim, I so appreciate you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your honesty. Most importantly, thank you for your time. You can find Jim on Facebook. You can go find his personal page if you want to find out more about him. There's also a Jim Butler for House of Delegates 18th District page, which is his political page. So you can find out more about what he stands for and things like that politically. But Jim, it's been so good to have you today on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Thank you for your time today, my friend.
Oh, it's been great to be here, and thank you very much.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.